This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth with breaking news today. We now have reports that Jeffrey Epstein, the accused sexual predator and pedophile, has been found dead by suicide, even though he was on suicide watch. We have this out from ABC News. Jeffrey Epstein, accused sex trafficker, dies by suicide, says officials. And this from New York Times. Jeffrey Epstein commits suicide at Manhattan jail. Officials say the body of Mr. Epstein, the financier indicted on sex trafficking charges last month, was found Saturday morning. And joining me on the line right now to help us break down this breaking news is Jason Bermas of the Bermas Brigade. Jason, thank you so much for joining us here on such short notice, because this is indeed breaking news, and you have been all over the Epstein case, not only covering it since his recent arrest, but you've been covering it in the months leading up to all of this. So I wanted to get your views on this, Jason. Let's start off with your initial reaction to this morning's news. What did you think when you first heard that Epstein committed suicide?
I mean, first of all, it's kind of unbelievable, right? I mean, a guy on suicide watch that should have been under 24-hour guard, in my opinion, not only should have had cameras surrounding his cell, but in his cell and on him. There's no reason, a $40 body camera shouldn't have been used in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, a alleged billionaire with intelligence connections. That unsealed documents came out just hours before this, not a day. They found them at 7:30 in the morning. So if you look at it, I don't think the documents were unsealed until about 9 or 10 a.m. and certainly didn't hit the web for another couple hours. We were at the forefront of going into those documents. New names were named. A lot of people were disappointed that the prince and the other prime minister were not named, but we got a key name. And let me explain this really quickly. I was all set to do a video on Bill Richardson. Why is Bill Richardson so important? Well, Bill Richardson is the former governor of New Mexico. And if these allegations are true by Guthrie Roberts, he's also a pedophile. Now, he governed the state where Jeffrey Epstein had his Zorro Ranch and allegedly wanted to start his little eugenics program that everybody has talked about. Another extremely underreported fact about that state is that the age of consent is 16. And many people believed when they used to report on Epstein that he had to plead to a 14-year-old girl, the initial charge of over 30 in that Palm Beach investigation. Not so, said the Department of Justice when they started looking into this before Epstein's arrest. In fact, they said he pled to a 16-year-old. Now, that means, Dan, in the United States, in 30 states, including New Mexico, he did not have to register. So that's a huge scandal in of itself that was never really reported on much in the mainstream media. However, with Richardson's name probably being at the marquee of people that just came out, that may have been under scrutiny. However, I fear that now everything's going to fall by the wayside, Dan.
Well, what do you think the likelihood is that we're going to see a lot of, obviously there's going to be conspiracy theories that are going to rise from this. And by the way, according to the FBI, we are all now domestic terrorists for even suggesting that there is a conspiracy with Epstein. But what sort of things do you think are going to come out of this in the coming days? I mean, I remember when the last time he allegedly tried to kill himself and marks were found on his neck, there were conflicting stories. Some people said he was found in the fetal position. Other reports said he was found spread out on the floor. I mean, a lot of real conspiracies are going to arise from this, Jason. Where do you see this moving in the next few days? I mean, we got Clinton body count trending on Twitter right now.
Well, of course, it's trending on Twitter. Little do they understand that although Bill Clinton is a high-level name, he's one that doesn't even come close to the decades-spanning relationships that Epstein had. Epstein connected to the Iran-Contra affair and Adnan Khashoggi through Vicky Ward. Epstein, confirmed trilateral commission member from 1995 till at least 2008. Epstein, admitted human trafficker at this point. Really, I mean, Dershowitz openly admits that a lot of these women were brought overseas for the purposes of sex with Prince Andrew in these depositions. However, he contends that they were of age, especially in the case of Guthrie. So all of these things are very much a reality. I don't know where this goes from here, brother. I got to tell you, I don't know that this is Arkansas or whatever, but he certainly had relationships with Clinton. It's uncomfortable, but guys, we've gone in depth in the relationships he really did have with Trump. I recently had Whitney Webb on. Actually yesterday, and she has an amazing 3-part series. You're going to have to sit down and dig in because each of these articles, if you're honest with yourself, is going to take you at least an hour to read plus. And in the beginning, she's connecting this network to the mafia and prohibition times through Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn is really the glue that seals this network. And she's done an amazing job all the way into the mega corporation. And a guy named Ronald Laudner, who she believes gave Epstein that passport. And she makes a pretty damn good case for it. Whether that's the truth or not, he definitely is connected to Epstein. So these connections were on the way into the mainstream because I don't know if you've noticed the trend, but especially in the last month or so since the arrest, many of the things myself and others have been talking about now for years not only became headlines, but they became fleshed out and more information came to the forefront, which is why this case was so important, Dan. Jeffrey Epstein himself, don't get me wrong, a monster, somebody that needs to be brought to justice. But this cabal, this network, is something that I've been railing about now for 15 plus years. And in the beginning days when we were talking about 9/11 and false flags and military intelligence and international intelligence operation, I was mocked for talking about child trafficking with the elites. Mocked. And now that, instead of the truth about 9/11, is in the headlines everywhere. It's a bizarre world.
Now, there are certain things that point to or would suggest that Epstein himself may have been aware that all this was going to be coming down on him before it did. What do you think about the fact that he sold Lolita Express, the one of the private jets that he had? I believe it was a couple of weeks before he was arrested. Miraculously, that evidence-filled airplane was sold off. Do you think he had an inkling about what was about to be handed down to him?
It's a good question. I don't think that if he had an inkling of what was actually going to be handed down to him, he would have come back to the States, period. Sarah Bronfman ain't coming back, bro. And you know what? Claire skated pretty well on that deal. I've covered Nexium ad nauseum. And for those that don't know, there is a Bronfman connection in this Epstein network and this Nexium network. Now, if you look at the funding, at least in the United States of Nexium, Claire Bronfman was clearly funding this thing. The Seagram's Baroness billionaire, her and her sister Sarah. Well, she just, after big-time plea deals, putting down $14.3 million for everybody else's defense fund, putting down $5 million from Ranieri alone, cut a deal where she'll pay $6 million in restitution due 21 to 72 months. This will all come down in September. And if she gets more than 27 months, she can appeal it. Now, if she gets, let's say they give her 24 months, how much time is she really going to spend in some exotic jail in her own wing? 12, 15 months? This shows that there is absolutely no justice. Now, this is the first time Jeffrey Epstein, I know a lot of people are going to disregard the fact that this could have been suicide, but watch my videos on the first thing. You got to understand, Nicholas Tartuglia, who they stuck him in with, the police officer, or I'm sorry, ex-police officer accused of triple murder, had actually, it's very bizarre, in that same wing of the prison, about a year earlier, had been attacked with a lock and a sock by inmates. So there was a physical altercation then, showing you that this is a dangerous area. In the weeks before Epstein actually gets into prison with him, somehow Tartuglia smuggles in and uses what's described as a miniature cell phone. So he also has some kind of access to the outside world, showing you that the police are corrupt enough to get those things in there, or that security's not tight. Now, let's just ponder Jeffrey Epstein, whoever he is. He's definitely lived a lavish lifestyle of privilege, no matter him going around having to work or do whatever, gather money. Now you're actually in a prison cell, and there's a lot of people in New York City that have daughters, brother. And when you hear some of these things about girls that looked as young as 8 and 9 years old, when you look at that one message that says 2 by 8, I know a lot of people say 16, but 16, when you start looking older, you didn't seem to be good for Epstein. It's very possible that all of a sudden the police just walked away and let some of their boys have their way with them. And how far did that go? Did that go to just a beating? Did that go to sodomy? et cetera, et cetera. When you're a 66-year-old man, a lot of people don't understand. This is an old man, too. And you just got beat and possibly raped. You may try to take your life. Okay? So listen, that's the thing. We got to look at all angles here. And that's what my show is about, Dan. You know, we've known each other well over a decade. I've never taken a right or left approach. And believe me, Epstein's money and influence goes on both sides. And that's what we have to understand. And that's what's really upsetting to me is because I really felt like we were on a momentum, a train to bring that type of information out to people. Is possibly a small light at the end of this tunnel, as those documents that were unsealed were in relation to his right-hand lady, Ghislaine Maxwell, correct?
Yeah.
So that's a lawsuit. Maxwell should be in prison by any stretch of the imagination when you read those allegations and how many people made them. Perhaps there's a small chance that we're able to arrest her on criminal charges because she doesn't appear to be employee 1, 2, or 3 in the indictments. That appears to be possibly Sarah Kellen, Nadia Marcinkova, maybe Natalia Malyshev, some of these other surrounding women. So if we can get her in jail and she doesn't somehow commit suicide or kill herself, perhaps we can still flesh this network out, because this trial wasn't going to take place for at minimum until June of next year, and lawyers were asking for September of next year. So this was going to drag out for a long time in the media. Another angle we have to look at, Dan.
Well, what would you say, Jason, then, is the main takeaway that people should be thinking about today in regards to this? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of conspiracy theories that are going to arise on Twitter, online, and it's going to muddy the waters. But we can't let that distort the fact that there are conspiracies going on behind the scenes where these elite politicians are involved. So what's the main takeaway you want people to remember about this Epstein case in a nutshell?
I want people to realize that this Epstein case, unfortunately, is not an isolated incident. A lot of people wanted to talk about this just being a blackmail operation, possibly Mossad, possibly CIA, possibly UK intelligence. But what I'm here to tell you is those are all moot points because they work for all of them. This is the international cabal, the intelligence network I've been talking about. And that's why when I made Fabled Enemies, I called it as such, an international intelligence operation. And these things didn't start with Epstein, and they're not going to end with Epstein. Not until we dismantle this unjust, unaccountable cabal and treat them like everybody else instead of some kind of elitist class that gets away with everything. You know, earlier I talked about Adnan Khashoggi and how he was an arms dealer basically in Iran-Contra. So what would he do? He was a Saudi billionaire. He would get the weapons from Czechoslovakia and Poland. He then marketed them to Mark Rich, the Mossad agent in Israel, all for plausible deniability. The Mossad would then ship them down to the Contras. They would get the weapons. The Contras then would have their drugs smuggled up by the Central Intelligence Agency. They would sell the drugs here and then abroad, and they would launder all the money through BCCI banking, which also funded the bin Laden network. And we can work it out from there. And the biggest thing no one talks about with Epstein's relationship with Prince Andrew, everybody wants to be royal scandal, 16-year-old girl. How about the fact that he's the country's arms dealer? He's the one cutting the deals for Saudi Arabia in the billions for arms. You think they might have had a discussion about that on top of the young girls? That's what I want people to take away. That was just a small part of a much larger operation. I encourage people to go check out my interview with Whitney Webb, which is just a 40-minute synopsis of many, many more questions that are brought up in her incredible Mint Press news piece.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, Jason. This thing is, in fact, bigger than Epstein himself. This could be just the tip of the iceberg of what we're about to actually see unravel in terms of what goes on behind the scenes with these sexual predators in elite circles. So, once again, Jason, thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. This is currently breaking news, so we are going to continue to follow this one as it develops. So be sure to stick with us here. Check out Jason at the Jason Bermas Brigade. Links will be located in the description below. And stay tuned as we continue our coverage on this one. Once again, Jason, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
We all want truth. The truth will set you free, free, free.